Welcome to Insights. I'm Eric. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about, we had a poll that was put up on social media, and we were talking about which of these markets would have a better performance in the second half of 2022, or perhaps maybe just the rest of 2022. And, people started voting on it, and we're going to talk about how you would use the matrix in order to even select these markets and maybe we can introduce a few others in terms of how which markets would we select and which ones would you even vote for technically while using the matrix to identify what are the high probability of trades. Now, in terms of this poll here, I would have to say that we broke things down into a pretty simple universe. We'd pick corn, Bitcoin, gold shares, and silver. And embedded with it, there's a lot of assumptions and biases. First of all, I'm sure everyone viewed it as a buy only prospect, nothing to short, and that is a big assumption. In reality, what you have to do is you have to look at markets based on what the invisible hand is saying. Is corn a long or a short? Is Bitcoin long or short? And all the way down. If they're not, if the composite trend or the primary trend is either up or down and the composite trend is not in agreement, you can't take a position that's opposite of the primary trend. That's the whole point of the evolution of the trade. The evolution of the trade, for anyone who's a subscriber, is you click this link and you get to the four phases which we buy securities or sell them. Number one is a nibble with an energy build. That's quite rare. That happens when a primary trend is extended. It's either extended to the downside or it's extended to the upside. And you notice a opposing energy build in the opposite direction. And you don't wait for a primary trend flip or even a flip in progress. Sometimes you nibble that build when it's a very, say, a large bullish energy build in an extended primary trend decline. In this phase here would be PTD2, which is an extremely extended primary trend, something that you would likely see a 2 standard deviation time frame or more on the monthly trend in the primary trend. That's not something that usually occurs, so we don't see a lot of nibbles. I don't even talk about them too often because the setup has to be perfect. Then the other part of the primary trend is we look for flips. First, the flip in progress, similar to what we see here in silver. It's not finalized. We have FIP. That's a market that wants to flip BU for the bull side. It's a 1 count, but it needs to finish that off at the end of the month, and we need to do that. You would get a flip, similar to what we see in the majors right here. That's a 2 count in the bull case, and that's a flip to the upside. And you can see it's the primary trend is up. These are all things that you would want to follow in the evolution of the trade. When you get the primary trend to flip, then you go in the direction of the primary trend. Within that, the three time frames, the daily, weekly, and monthly, either go into agreement and you get the composite trend to go into triple alignment. In this case, the major's in a triple upside alignment because all 3 time frames are aligned up. But the question is, in terms of the poll, would you buy the gold shares? And it's assumed it would be to the long side. But if someone was thinking, well, gold shares are certainly a short, it would go against everything, against the evolution of the trade because the primary trend is up, the composite trend is in triple alignment. So it isn't something that you would be taking on the short side whatsoever. But these are things that don't get reflected inside the poll. And when we ask these questions, and these are biases that exist to everyone who invests, trades, or even thinks about markets, you have to cut through what you believe before and really to get down to what we're doing is following the invisible hand. So when we look at this again, which investment would we pick or which asset would you pick in the remainder of 2022? Well, to do this, you would have to understand where all of these assets lie within. I broke it down in terms of price and time cycles. Here's a low price cycle and a low time score cycles. These are the emerging trades as they come up in primary trend flips. First, the primary trend flips, and then we go into triple alignment, and we carry this until the price and time cycle go into a high reading, and we move in a diagonal fashion down here And they said that the position ages as we move until you get here, which is the maximum reading that you can get in terms of the price and time cycle. And that's when the computer starts to identify primary trend decline 1, primary trend decline 2, and then you get out of the position. So the real question is which one would you pick for 2022? And I put some of these in here. For starters, silver is not even in the grid yet. Why is it not in the grid? Because it's a flip in progress, but it's not finalized. You need to have a flip up or flip down. To say that you're bullish silver without the primary trend organized into a flip, which is a 2 count here, that's assuming that silver is going to do that. We have no way of knowing that silver is going to be doing that. You'd have to wait for it towards the end of the month. So for now, silver's not even on the grid. So if I had that, it would take silver right off the grid altogether. It wouldn't even be a possibility until the primary trend flips up. Now, 37% of the people voting here thought silver was going to perform in the second half of the year. Well, obviously they're guessing because the primary trend hasn't even confirmed that yet. The primary trend could never, maybe it doesn't confirm until the month of May or June. You're going to look awfully foolish because of what we believe is going to happen in silver. I see a lot of belief with silver and gold anyways, Bitcoin too. Bitcoin's another market that people voted for, but Bitcoin would be a position that would be short. If we head back to here, we can see Bitcoin's count is not in the bull column, but it's in the bear column, BRT, and it's 4. It's not very profitable because the primary trend has flipped down. The weekly trend is down. The daily trend is up, and that's it's working against this position. But to even be long, and under the assumption that you would be long Bitcoin in 2022, you can't do that until the monthly trend flips down. So this would probably, unless you would say I'm voting for Bitcoin as being the best performer, you would have to be thinking I'm shorting this according to at least where it stands in the matrix. The only market that stands as an emerging play is the gold shares. If we look at that, the gold shares are a flip in progress. It's finalized, so it started on April 1st. We have a 2 count. We have triple alignment to the upside too, but it's a little extended because the daily's been up for 40 straight days. That's why the computer designates it as a mid-cycle, and we see the X bar as 0.17. That's above 0. That doesn't mean it's extremely dangerous. It just means it's a little bit winded. So when we look at the grid back here, the gold shares are not at the tip of the corner here. They're moving a little bit down, but they could reset and take a step back if the daily turns down and then flips back up and resets all these cycles again. But the fact is the majors are fairly early, at least in terms of the evolution of the trade. So it's a good candidate to buy for the rest of 2022. Corn is also a candidate, but it fits in a different place inside this grid. Corn's way over here on the other side, on the right side, with the exception of the left side. So we start in here, we enter the race here, and we drive down a straight line until we eject out, and then we circle back in, and we come in again. The whole point of this is if you're successful, such as a US dollar was a primary trend flip, and we'll head back to that quick, and I put that up 8 months ago. Well, it's starting to produce a profit now, 5% gain. Used to be 0, used to be a market that everyone was making fun of, but it is chugging along here, and it's slowly moving down this grid away from this corner and down to that corner over there. And the reason for that is the primary trend remains down. It's right here. It's still relatively young. The weekly trend's a bit more extended. It's colored blue, but that's not dangerous. The daily trend's been down for 32 days, and we're starting to get some extension here. It would be a candidate for a reset where it would go down and then back up again, and then that would reset this and improve the position. But the fact is the dollar is actually a fairly decent emerging play. It's a little bit more solidified in comparison to gold shares and Bitcoin. Bitcoin short because it moves away. The further you move away from this upper left-hand corner or upper corner here and move down and cross the X and Y axis, it gets more safe. But the fact is once you pull by the X and Y axis for even corn, it becomes more and more unstable as you reach the apex right here of a completely vulnerable trend that has high in price and time cycle. This destabilizes, and it's slowly destabilizing corn. So we get back to this question as of what market would you pick? Well, gold shares is an emerging play, and it's difficult to say I would pick a market. That's not how you do it. What you do is you spread your market money wisely. Perhaps you would be in corn, and I'm already in corn, and we're going to stay there until it gets so far to this apex and it goes primary trend 1 or 2, then you have to sell out the position. But you can't just simply own corn and then ignore all the rest. You have to have something warming up in the bullpen. Gold shares long would be one of those candidates. Bitcoin short would be another. The dollar's not in there. That's certainly a more mature play. It's far more stable than these ones that are floating around here. Silver is being talked like it's in the grid, but it sits outside the grid. It's not even ready. These guys might be called in from the bullpen, but silver's certainly inside the bullpen and is not even pitching yet. If you don't understand American baseball, it's just if you're in a game, you're pitching, and this would be a long, and your pitcher needs to get pulled. This guy's still warming up. He's throwing the ball on the sideline. He's not even ready to get in the game yet. When he does, silver's going to enter right here, and it's going to move down. And if we're successful, it moves from the upper corner to the lower corner, and you will have made a lot of money in the process. I remember a long time ago, corn flipped. Corn flipped 18 months ago, and it entered here. And I'm sure when it did so, if I was probably recording this stuff for social media, we would have took an awful beating for being bullish corn. And that's how it goes. We took an awful beating for suggesting that the dollar was going to rally and that the position was to be long. Corn was a similar time in 2022, but we've slowly moved across as time passes to where corn is roughly about here. Does that mean corn's not going to be a very good producer in 2022? Well, that's not necessarily, but it's becoming less of a probability of event because the position is aging so quickly. Corn has had in the long-term database, there's over 81 impulses and primary trend impulses. It takes a lot of data to record that. We have corn going back into the 1800s, roughly the early 1800s. So you get 81 bullish impulses. Here's some of the impulse. The current impulse today is 95% up. We can see that here. It's 18. Here's 95%. We know that corn's down here, but can it keep going to this corner? Yeah, it can do that, but the odds of it doing that are dropping with each month and the further up corn goes. Here's some examples of today's impulse relative to some of the big ones. I didn't write down 81 of them. I just marked all of them that were above roughly about 65. And here's some of the major dates that we came up with. There's roughly 8 of them that are currently higher than today's impulse. I counted 2008 as a one complete impulse that goes up 218% because it was broken apart by a 1 month reversal down and back up. And if you did that, it generated a 94% upward move. If you filter that out and ignore that, it was more like a 218% move. So that's one of them. There's one bigger move in 1995. There's a bigger move in 1974, 35. You can see the dates down here. The fact is there's only about 10% of the moves that are on record that are bigger than today's move, which means that corn is not too far away from this apex. Now, if it does get to the apex, the 95% could produce returns of 130, 170, all the way up to a 400% return. They have been seen before, and it's not out of the possibility. But the fact is the probabilities are decreasing. So if you were going to put all your weight in saying corn's going to carry our portfolio, markets that tend to carry the portfolio are not in the corners here or here, but rather more in the centralized location. And I hate to say it, but the US dollar is more likely to carry your portfolio in 2022 than anything else. And anybody who's watching this open review after the discussion to try and learn something, I suggest we have a US dollar report that's on file. I would consider subscribing to that or participating in that one, because the reason why the US dollar, and I'm going to let the cat out of the bag on this one, is going to produce so well is because once you get into the center part and make a crossover into this grid here, this gives you a lot of opportunity to make a fair amount of money, and it's a much more stable trend than counting on corn. Now, there is no other one. If silver can get into the grid, it gets into the game, But maybe the gold shares is the play to be focusing on for now because at least it's in the grid. It's Bitcoin short is in the grid, but they're early. A lot of times when markets start out, corn was no different. I remember we talked about it with coffee, observed it. The US dollar the same. Anybody who's been following the matrix for more than a year or two knows that when markets enter the grid here, they tend to get dicey. There's about roughly about a 10 to 15% failure rate. And that's pretty low considering the amount of failure rate that I see on the internet. But it's still, you're more likely to fail early than you are later. So you have to kind of push away from the upper corner. The further you get from the upper corner, the more stable the trend gets and the more likely you're going to pile on gains. I warn people that the US dollar is not done, and you're probably going to make a crossover from here into this grid at some point. And while the US dollar is probably not going to generate a 95% return, it's on a 5% return, maybe gets up to 10 or 15. Those are big returns for the world's core currency and for a forex market. If you're using leverage with that, you're probably making a lot of money. That makes the dollar the real play. That's not even inside the poll. But inside of this poll, how would I answer it? I wouldn't pick one single market. I would be long corn. I'd have a position probably in the gold shares long, and I would be considering a short on Bitcoin. But the problem is it's difficult to short Bitcoin. So I'd either probably stay out of it or have a very short leash on my long-term position, which is already vulnerable because the primary trend is down. Now, I know I've said that silver is next, and it could be. Cocoa is next as well, but cocoa's taken a long time because the setup is wrong, and silver might do the same thing. Silver might be, I don't know, a month out, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. This is where people, and someone said a comment like, well, silver's been disappointing. Well, no kidding. If you're long silver, it should be disappointing. Primary trend hasn't been up. It's been in consolidation for a long time. Primary trend is currently down. It's been down for several months. If you have a long position against a primary downtrend, there's going to be a lot of disappointment. So if you want to be bullish on silver, first thing you got to do is you got to get it into the grid. It's currently down, but I wouldn't short silver because silver, if you look at it, silver is moving upwards. Silver's it's down here, but it's up and it's up. It's just lacking triple alignment, and this is a fresh uptick that needs to finalize next month. So the play is not to be short silver. But the fact is we still have to wait for the primary trend to flip, and that best case scenario that won't happen until next month, and that's going to be in May. So you got to get silver into the grid. Well, does that mean silver is going to get from here to here? It can, but it means it might be a rough start to get, oftentimes to get from the upper corner just to where the US dollar is. It's a lot of frustration and chop and a lot of disappointment. And what has silver done for me lately? Markets that tend to do best are the ones that are not in the corner. They're somewhat in the middle of the grid. They're still a little bit early, and then they jump over to the other side. We were saying this about corn was over here not that long ago in 2021. We knew this. This is before I introduced a lot of these concepts into social media anyways. I would have said that corn, and this was with soybeans as well, were the plays, but they have now gone over and crossed into the grid, and they're a lot more stable, and they're a lot older than they were before, which means they're reducing their potential. That doesn't mean I'm going to run and sell my own corn, all of the corn that we own. If we get to this corner position here, yeah, you still can make more money, but it's a lower probability event than you are to see the dollar make the transition over. Perhaps the gold will get there, but it's going to take a couple months for gold to get from here to here. If gold gets from here to here, it's going to make more money than the US dollar, that's for sure, because it's far more volatile asset class. But it's still in the unstable region where it hasn't really, the expectations still have to be low because it's just starting out. The markets do that. I talked about coffee. I talked about cotton like this. They start out slow and then they take off. But the fact is if you get too far down here, the position gets too old to be relied upon. So you have to have something in your pipeline that fits next. So holding a core position of corn is fine, but I would be banking it with probably the gold shares, and I would be betting that the US dollar is the most stable return in 2022. If you guys have any questions about the poll and how we use the matrix in general to establish what is the best Opportunity cost are the best plays. It's not one item. You have a menu of items that you play, and one usually takes off while the other ones try and they get a bit indecisive, and then one runs its course, then another one takes over, and then one runs its course and gets over here. The whole point is to take profits and move on and find something else. If you have any questions about any of that, let us know. I hope this sheds some light to everyone on how we use the matrix and how everyone should be using the matrix. And I encourage everyone that's watching on social media and on the internet and reading our website to consider joining in with the Matrix before it gets too late. The Matrix has a subscription key that ends on December. The price gets a little bit cheaper with each passing month, but there's no rush to drop the price. The information's pretty solid. And eventually what will happen is we'll issue a new key in 2023. But I wouldn't wait too long. This market 2022 is going to get difficult, and I'm going to give another hint. It's because the US dollar is going to cross over and start to age, and as it rallies, it's going to put enormous pressure on the system. So get on board, consider the US dollar report. There's numerous reports that we put out. It's in the report page at the website. I would suggest to check it out. And I certainly would combine that with a subscription to the Matrix, at least for me. But, I've been using this thing for quite a while, and I understand what it does. The whole trick is to get everyone who's involved. The Matrix is updated daily or after every trading day. Learn to download it, learn to read it, learn to follow these cycles. Enter in when the cycles are low for price and time, and hopefully they will push across so that they both go from low to high high cycles of price and time here. So you move from here to here. If you do that and you follow this, it's kind of like a train. One asset goes in, another asset comes out, and that's how you make consistent returns from one time period to the next. So thanks for watching, and hope we'll talk to you guys real soon. If not, check out the Matrix. It will be updated again tomorrow. We'll talk to you guys real soon.